He meant nothing, but somehow I lost everything. It's concise, dramatic, and instantly sparks curiosity while hinting at heartbreak and forbidden attraction. Perfect for a YouTube short or thumbnail text. The first time he noticed her, it wasn't dramatic. She didn't walk in like a scene from a movie, and there was no music swelling in the background. It was subtle, the kind of moment that only hits you when you're paying attention, and he was. She moved through the room with a quiet confidence, a natural ease that made everyone else feel almost invisible. There was a grace in her step, an unspoken assurance in the way she held herself, like she had learned life's lessons but carried them lightly. He remembered the sunlight catching her hair, golden highlights that seemed to shift as she turned. It wasn't just the color. It was the warmth it seemed to carry, like the sun had lingered in her presence before it reached him. There was a rhythm to her gestures, the way she absent-mindedly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle tilt of her head when she listened, the way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. Each movement was small, ordinary, but somehow it drew him in. He couldn't stop noticing her laughter. It wasn't loud or forced, but soft, and it lingered in the chest, an echo that seemed to wrap around him even after the sound had faded. It wasn't directed at him yet, or maybe it was, but he felt it anyway, a quiet tug at something he didn't even realize was longing to be tugged. He tried to focus on other things, telling himself he shouldn't stare, that he didn't even know her. But there was something magnetic about her presence, the kind that makes the air heavier, the room quieter, even when everyone else is talking. He caught himself observing the subtle lines of her face, the small creases around her eyes when she smiled, the way her lips curved ever so slightly when she spoke. These details, he realized, weren't just appearances. They were hints of a life fully lived, experiences that shaped her in ways he couldn't yet understand. Even though nothing had happened between them, he felt an inexplicable connection. It wasn't romantic yet. Not really. It was curiosity, fascination, the sense that she was someone who could leave a mark on your life without even trying. And in that first moment of noticing her, he also felt a flutter of hesitation, a whisper in the back of his mind warning him not to get too involved. Because he knew, even without knowing her, that this encounter could change something. Maybe it would be brief, maybe it would fizzle out, but there was a weight in the air he couldn't ignore. He felt the faint, unspoken promise of tension, of emotions waiting to stir. It was subtle like the first shiver of wind before a storm, but enough to make him sit a little straighter, breathe a little deeper, and realize that life is life, might just feel different from this moment onward. And that's all it took. One look, one fleeting moment, for a quiet intrigue to root itself deep in him, laying the foundation for a connection that neither of them yet understood, but that would grow in ways neither could anticipate. Their first real conversation wasn't planned. It happened in that almost accidental way life has of nudging people together, over a shared mistake, a fleeting encounter, or a moment when words are just what the heart needs to say. He remembered the exact moment, the soft rustle of papers, the faint clink of coffee cups, and her eyes, the kind that held your attention without demanding it. She looked at him once, just once, and the world seemed to tilt slightly. It started small. A comment about the weather, a shared joke that didn't land for anyone else but made them both laugh. His chest tightened in that familiar, inexplicable way when someone unexpectedly understands a part of you. He noticed the warmth in her smile, the way it spread slowly across her face, not forced but genuine, brushing against him like sunlight on skin. When she spoke, he listened, truly listened, as if every word mattered. Her voice had a soft steadiness, but there was a subtle edge of vulnerability hiding beneath it, a quiet honesty that drew him in. And there were the small touches, almost accidental, that lingered in his mind. The brief brush of her hand as she passed him a pen, her fingers grazing his knuckles for the briefest of moments. It was fleeting, yet it sparked a pulse of warmth, a subtle awareness of proximity he hadn't expected. He became hyper-aware of every detail. The faint scent of her perfume, a delicate, powdery fragrance that seemed to settle in the air long after she left. The way her hair fell over her shoulder, catching the light in strands of soft brown and gold. The tilt of her head when she smiled, hinting at thoughts she didn't voice. Each small gesture felt amplified, magnified by the quiet intimacy of their interaction. Yet there was hesitation. He felt it in the pause before he spoke, in the careful way he chose words, aware of the age gap, aware of the world outside their little bubble. And he sensed it in her, too. An invisible line she didn't cross, a cautious respect for boundaries he both admired and longed to cross. There was no rush, no overt advances, just the gradual weaving of connection through subtle attention and silent understanding. He felt it in the way their eyes met slightly longer than necessary, in the almost imperceptible lean toward each other when they talked, and in the comfortable silence that settled like a blanket between them when conversation paused. And as he walked away that day, the memory lingered. The warmth of her presence, the quiet thrill of her attention, the sense that something unspoken had begun to form. It wasn't love yet. Not exactly. It was intrigue, fascination, a magnetic pull that neither could define. But it was enough. Enough to make him replay every word, every gesture, every fleeting touch in his mind. The slow burn had begun, and though neither of them would admit it yet, the emotional thread that tied them together was stronger than mere coincidence. It was the start of something that would soon reshape the boundaries of longing, restraint, and desire. By the time they met again, the quiet curiosity that had flickered between them had begun to grow into something more tangible, something that neither fully understood but both could feel. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations or obvious confessions. Instead, it was in the small moments, the fleeting instances where walls lowered without a word. She shared a story that day, a memory from her past, soft-spoken yet weighted with quiet pain. He listened genuinely, every detail absorbing him like a slow current pulling him deeper. Her voice, steady but layered with subtle emotion, drew him closer without any physical proximity. And then there were the small touches that punctuated their interaction. Her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table near his, the accidental brush of her fingers against his as she reached for a notebook. It was enough to send a shiver up his spine, a subtle awareness that lingered long after the moment passed. He noticed everything about her, as if he were cataloging pieces of her presence that no one else seemed to see. The quiet tremor in her laughter when she was genuinely amused, the slight crease in her forehead when she paused to think, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of someone she had once loved and lost. Each detail deepened the connection he felt, making it impossible to ignore the pull between them. Physical closeness, though minimal, carried weight. Sitting slightly nearer than necessary, the brushing of shoulders, the shared warmth of leaning in during conversation. These small acts, mundane in appearance, created a charged intimacy. He felt it in the steady thrum of his own heartbeat, the subtle rush of awareness in his chest whenever she looked at him with that soft, measured gaze. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in these gestures, a silent agreement that neither had yet defined. But it wasn't just the physical cues, it was the emotional resonance that struck him hardest. He felt a strange mixture of admiration, protectiveness, and longing, emotions he had never fully associated with someone so unattainable. She had an elegance born of experience, a quiet strength tempered by vulnerability, and he was drawn to both equally. And yet, he was painfully aware of the boundaries, her caution, her hesitation, the invisible lines she maintained. In his mind, he replayed every glance, every smile, every subtle brush of skin. Each instance carried a weight that he couldn't fully articulate, a tension between what was possible and what was forbidden. The slow burn was intensifying, growing in quiet intensity, building a web of emotional connection that neither could ignore. As they parted that day, he felt a new ache, the longing for her presence, the desire to understand her completely, and the fear that he might never reach the depth he craved. It was a strange, bittersweet realization. He was becoming entwined with someone whose life he barely glimpsed, and yet the pull was undeniable. This was the moment their connection became more than curiosity. It became trust, even if fragile. And with trust came vulnerability. And with vulnerability came the undeniable awareness that their story was no longer just about fleeting encounters. It had begun quietly, irrevocably, and it would change him in ways he had not yet imagined. The connection that had begun so quietly now felt like a delicate thread stretched taut, ready to snap under the weight of their emotions. He found himself thinking about her more than he realized, replaying her laugh, the way her hand had brushed his, the subtle tilt of her head when she spoke. It was a pull he couldn't resist, yet one he couldn't fully embrace either. There was a tension inside him, a battle between desire and restraint, fascination and caution. The world outside, their little bubble, began to intrude, and with it, the pressure of social perception. Colleagues' whispers, casual remarks from friends, the quiet, unspoken judgment in someone's glance. They all reminded him that this connection wasn't conventional. The age difference, though never discussed aloud, hung in the air like an invisible barrier, a constant reminder that life's rules were still very much in place. He noticed the way he hesitated before speaking, measuring his words carefully. Even a simple compliment felt loaded with implications, a risk he wasn't sure he could take. And yet, whenever she laughed at something he said, or her gaze lingered just slightly longer than necessary, he felt the magnetic pull of the bond between them intensify. It was intoxicating, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. She, too, seemed to wrestle with unspoken boundaries. There were moments when her vulnerability peeked through, the faint sigh after a long day, the way she sometimes brushed her hand along the edge of his, lingering just a heartbeat too long, but she always pulled back, retreating behind the walls of experience and caution she had built over the years. It was a delicate dance of closeness and restraint, one that neither could fully control. The slow burn was punctuated by subtle, sensory details that made every encounter feel significant. A shared coffee in the quiet corner of a cafe became a world unto itself. The warmth of her hand near his, the faint scent of her perfume, the soft rustle of her hair brushing his shoulder. Each small touch, each fleeting glance, carried emotional weight far greater than the action itself. Internal conflict gnawed at him constantly. He wanted to reach out, to close the space between them, but fear held him back. Fear of judgment, fear of misunderstanding, fear of losing what he already had, a fragile connection built on trust, vulnerability, and subtle intimacy. He realized that his heart was caught between two worlds, the magnetic pull of desire and the rational insistence that some lines shouldn't be crossed. And yet, in the quiet moments when no one else was watching, when their eyes met across a table or a room, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no judgment, no expectation, just the undeniable awareness of each other, the slow burn of emotions that neither could name, but both felt in every shared laugh, every subtle touch, every lingering gaze. By the end of the day, he knew that the connection was no longer innocent curiosity. It was desire tempered by restraint, attraction entwined with respect, and longing balanced by hesitation. The conflict, the tension between what was appropriate and what felt inevitable, was now the defining force between them, setting the stage for everything yet to come. The slow burn had been building for weeks, each stolen glance, each subtle touch adding weight to the unspoken tension between them. But that day, everything shifted. It wasn't a grand confrontation or a dramatic declaration. It was something far more devastating in its simplicity, a moment of miscommunication, a misunderstanding that neither saw coming. He watched her from across the room, the way her laughter carried just a little differently than it had before, the way her eyes met someone else's instead of his. At first, he tried to dismiss it, telling himself he was imagining things. But as the moments stretched, the tiny inconsistencies began to feel monumental. The brush of her hand against another, the fleeting attention she gave someone else, it stung in a way that made his chest tighten, an ache that had no words. He remembered the small, once meaningful gestures that now seemed distant. The brief touch of her fingers, the leaning in during quiet conversations, the shared smiles. Each memory suddenly felt fragile, almost unreal, like smoke slipping through his grasp. He felt powerless, caught between longing and resignation, and the slow burn that had been a gentle, warming pull now throbbed with sharp, unrelenting intensity. The heartbreak wasn't explosive, it was quiet, insidious. It came in the form of a glance he couldn't return, a laugh he wasn't part of, a presence that felt impossibly far away despite being just a few steps from him. Each subtle signal chipped away at the fragile connection they had built, leaving him unmoored and painfully aware of how deeply he cared. Physical cues mirrored his emotional turmoil. His shoulders sagged, the weight of invisible chains pressing him down. His hands itched to reach for her, to bridge the gap, but he restrained himself, painfully aware of the line he couldn't cross. Even the air between them seemed heavier, charged with the unspoken truth that something vital had shifted. He replayed every interaction, wondering where he had gone wrong, whether a word left unsaid, a glance unnoticed, or a hesitation too long had led to this moment. The internal dialogue was relentless. Confusion, regret, and longing intertwined with a sense of helplessness. He had allowed himself to care too much, to invest emotionally in someone who, for reasons beyond his control, was now slipping away. And yet, in the midst of this heartbreak, there remained a faint, stubborn thread of connection, a memory of the warmth she brought, the softness of her gaze, the subtle brush of her hand that had once sent a quiet thrill through him. It was a bittersweet reminder that the bond they shared had been real, even if it could no longer remain intact. By the end of the day, he faced an uncomfortable truth. He had lost something he hadn't fully named, something that was never guaranteed, but had felt, in fleeting moments, as though it could have been his. The slow burn had reached its peak, and now he was left in the quiet aftermath, staring at what remained of a connection that had meant everything to him, even if it had meant nothing to her. The days that followed felt strangely hollow. The world moved around him, but he moved through it as if underwater, slowed, distorted, and muted. He saw her occasionally, though never in the same way. The subtle glances, the soft smiles, the shared warmth of proximity, they were gone. In their place was a quiet distance that seemed to stretch endlessly, and every small detail he had once treasured now carried a pang of absence. He noticed the smallest things, and they cut deeper than he expected. The faint scent of her perfume lingering in a room they once shared a conversation in, the subtle warmth of sunlight on the place she used to sit, the echo of her laughter in his memory. Even the brush of a stranger's hand, casual and unremarkable, made him think of her, a ghost of what had been. The slow burn he had felt before had turned into a dull ache, a persistent reminder of what he had lost. It wasn't just that she was absent. It was the realization that he had invested emotionally in something fragile, something that had never been fully his to begin with. The heartbreak was compounded by the understanding that some connections, however intense, are ephemeral. They leave traces of warmth, but also of loss, and he felt the weight of it pressing against his chest in quiet, relentless waves. He remembered the moments of closeness they had shared, the brief touches, the way her shoulder had brushed his, the comfort of sitting near her, the faint tremor of vulnerability in her voice. Each memory now carried a double edge, the beauty of the moment and the sting of its absence. He realized that he had lost not just her presence, but the sense of possibility she had represented, the quiet hope that perhaps something more could exist between them. The slow burn had shifted from longing to reflection. He found himself replaying conversations in his mind, searching for missed signals, wondering if there had been a way to hold on, to bridge the distance. The answers eluded him, and the uncertainty only deepened the ache. Yet amidst the pain, there was a quiet acknowledgement of what he had gained. Insight into his own heart, the ability to feel deeply, and the reminder that connection, even fleeting, can leave a permanent mark. Every day, he carried fragments of her with him. The subtle tilt of her head, the softness of her gaze, the warmth of her presence. They were memories that no one could take away, yet they were also reminders of what was gone. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that some losses are measured not in dramatic endings, but in quiet, lingering absences that shape the way you move through the world. By the end of this period, he had begun to accept the inevitability of a loss. He felt the ache, yes, but he also recognized the depth of what had existed between them. The connection had been real, even if brief and unfulfilled, and in its quiet, bittersweet way, it had changed him. He had lost much, perhaps everything he thought he wanted, but he had also been touched in ways that would stay with him, subtle yet profound, for the rest of his life. Time, he realized, had a peculiar way of softening the edges of heartbreak without erasing the memories. He no longer felt the raw ache of longing that had consumed him in the days after their last encounter. Instead, there was a quiet space in his chest where the intensity of his emotions had once resided, a space filled with reflection, understanding, and a subtle sense of gratitude. He thought of her often, not with the desperate yearning that had once defined his thoughts, but with a calm appreciation. He remembered the warmth of her presence, the gentle brush of her hand, the way her eyes had held his in moments of unspoken understanding. These memories were vivid, yet they no longer cut. They comforted him, like a cherished photograph tucked safely in a drawer. He had lost her, yes, but he had also been touched by someone remarkable, someone who had quietly changed the way he felt and thought about connection. In this period of reflection, he began to understand the nuances of what had occurred. The slow burn that had ignited between them had never been simple. It was layered with hesitation, social boundaries, and unspoken fears. But within that complexity had existed moments of genuine intimacy, emotional intimacy that transcended mere attraction. He had glimpsed her vulnerability, shared laughter, and quiet attention, and these moments had left an indelible mark on his heart. He also recognized something else, that the story wasn't just about loss, but about growth. The experience had forced him to confront feelings he had never fully acknowledged, to navigate the tension between desire and restraint, and to understand the fragility of human connection. In losing her, he had gained insight into himself, the depth of his emotions, the value of trust, and the bittersweet beauty of fleeting intimacy. Even as life moved forward, he found small ways to honor what had existed. The memories were not burdens. They were gentle reminders of the subtle power of connection. A fleeting smile from a stranger, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the quiet echo of laughter, all brought him back, in a way, to the moments they had shared. And in that reflection, he found peace. He no longer wished for what could have been. The longing had softened into acceptance. He could see clearly now that some stories are not meant to culminate in possession or permanence, but in the quiet imprint they leave behind. He had been touched, and in being touched, he had learned to carry both loss and love with grace. As he walked through his days, he felt a new kind of strength, the ability to remember without pain, to cherish without clinging, to honor what had passed while embracing what remained in the present. The story had ended fully, without dramatic closure or sweeping gestures. Yet it was complete, beautiful in its imperfection, and deeply human. He understood at last. He had lost much, perhaps everything he thought he wanted, but in the process he had gained a profound understanding of himself, of love, and of the delicate, fleeting connections that define a life. And that, in its quiet way, was enough.